Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. So today I'm going to bring you all my review for It Chapter 2, which is the sequel to the 2017 live-action adaptation of Stephen King's famous novel, It. So It Chapter 2 takes place 27 years after the events of the first film. All of the kids from the Losers Club are grown-up adults and are living their own lives, but when Pennywise reawakens from his 27-year nap and goes back to haunting the town of Derry, Maine, the losers must honor their agreement and reunite to take down Pennywise once and for all. I'm personally someone who loves the 2017 It. That movie was a very, very big surprise for me. I went into it not really knowing what to expect. I'm someone who really doesn't see horror films that often. Before seeing It, the last horror film I had seen was Conjuring 2. And after It, it was, I believe, Pet Sematary. Those films are all separated by over a year. So that tells you guys how often I see horror films. But I didn't just see It one time, I saw it twice. That's how much I love that movie. I thought it was a great film. And the weakest aspect of it for me was the horror elements. I didn't think it was a very scary movie, but it nailed the characters so well, which is something that horror films these days really don't often focus on. The characters are always kind of average. They're just these really stupid, stereotypical people, and they always do really dumb things. But in It, the kids were perfect. They talked like kids, they acted like kids, the dialogue was great, the humor was great. That first film worked so well, and that was something that I was kind of worried about in the second movie, was transitioning from those kids, which I believe almost every audience member loved, and going over to adults, where they might have lost all of that charisma and energy that made the group so great. That was something I was worried about. The social media reviews from a few weeks ago were pretty mixed, which is something that is really odd and kind of unusual, because normally social media embargo reviews are very praiseworthy. For example, Godzilla King of the Monsters had fantastic reviews, and then when the movie actually came out and critics were actually able to say their thoughts, it was getting very negative reviews. It has a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I was nervous about that with It Chapter 2, and the film did end up getting kind of a mixed rating. I believe it has a 68 in Rotten Tomatoes right now, so I was worried that this film was going to be really long, kind of slow, and messy. I'm happy to report to you guys that I loved It Chapter 2. I think this is a fantastic finale to this two-part movie series. I loved almost every second of this film. I think it's a very, very great sequel. It works as well as the first film, in my opinion, in many ways. Now, it's still not perfect. I don't think the first one was perfect either, but these two films together make a fantastic horror thing. I don't know if you'd call it a movie, because it's two separate films that are going to equal like 5 hours, but these two films together are perfect. It makes a very great, enjoyable time, and I had a ton of fun with the adult actors in this film, which, like I said, was something I was a little bit worried about. I think the adult cast was fantastic, and the casting was spot on. Some of these actors look just like their child counterparts. For example, James Ransone as Eddie was fantastic. He looks just like the original actor Jack Dylan Grazer from the first film if he was 27 years older. A lot of the casting here was just absolutely perfect. I think everybody in the movie does a very good job. Jessica Chastain was fantastic as Beverly. James McAvoy was great as Bill Hader. That doesn't make sense. Bill Hader was great, though, as Richie, and James McAvoy was great as Bill. That makes more sense. Everybody, like I said, just did a really good job. Now, I do feel like one of the adult actors was kind of pushed to the side, and that was the actor that played Ben. I don't remember his name. I just felt like he wasn't really used as much as the other cast members. Same could probably be said about Mike, although Mike's kind of the character that brings everyone together in this movie, so he still had a pretty big role, whereas for me, Ben kind of just felt pushed to the side. He wasn't really that huge in this movie, and he wasn't in the first one either, so he was kind of just the odd man out in the group, but everybody else, very good, like I said. One of the things that this film did that when I heard about early on kind of got me a bit nervous was it has a lot of flashbacks with the younger kids, and I had a feeling that because of that, it was going to feel kind of, messy, because it was going to cut so much between the adults and the kids, but the way they did it was very, very smart. The adults would go back to a location from the first movie and kind of relive these moments, and then you would see, it kind of cut to them as a kid, and it was just edited very, very well. And something that also kind of, worked for me was that all the scenes that we see with the adults, when they're also kids, were new scenes. It wasn't scenes that were in the first movie. There was like one or two scenes that were, but a lot of them were actually new scenes that kind of took place in between some of the Pennywise moments with the group, which I liked. So you're getting to see these new creepy scenes that weren't in the first film, and I just thought having that, it also kept it feeling fresh, because I was worried that it was going to be all of the things we knew from the very first movie, which luckily it wasn't. So this film wasn't as flashback and callback heavy as I thought it was going to be, which is good, because it's only a 2-year-old film, so if you're going to have a bunch of callbacks reminding us of what happened in the first film, it's going to be kind of pointless, and not going to work very well. So luckily they didn't do that, and I was happy about that. Now, one aspect this film sadly doesn't improve over the first is the horror elements. The first film wasn't very scary in my opinion. That was the one negative I had for that movie back in 2017, and it's pretty much the same thing here. I think this film might even be a little bit less scary than the first film, which is saying a lot because the first film, like I said, didn't really get me at all. This film still had kind of a disturbing tone, but I think the first one was even a little bit more disturbing, so that kind of took away from this film a little bit. I also feel like the humor was played a little bit too much at times. It was a little bit awkward, whereas with the kids it made more sense. Here sometimes it felt like they were kind of just throwing it in there, and it was a little bit, kind of ham-fisted. It felt like they were just trying to shove it in there to make the audience laugh, and it didn't always work for me, but a lot of the humor in this movie was great. Speaking of the humor, Bill Hader steals it as Richie Tozier. He is my favorite character in this movie. He was absolutely hilarious. I thought the casting was great. He reminds me so much of Finn Wolfhard in the first one, and they definitely nailed that aspect. There was also one thing with this character that I was a little bit worried would be kind of forced going into the movie that I actually think they handled beautifully, and it actually was kind of emotional as well. This movie is a little bit sad. There were some things near the end that got me very sad, actually, and that was one aspect I really wasn't expecting, because the first film had that a little bit with Georgie and some of that stuff, but this movie really, really does have the emotions in it, which was good. It made me care for the characters, and it, tugged on the heartstrings a bit. I don't know. It sounds dumb, but it's true. I actually think this worked very, very well, which is something that many horror films, like I said, don't do. So I would put this above many modern horror films just because it handles the characters so well, and like I said, it's also kind of emotional. Many horror films aren't like that these days. The only difference is that there's a lot of horror films these days that I would call probably scarier than this. So it's kind of a mixed bag in that sense, but still, very good movie overall, guys. I haven't reviewed a film in a while, so I know I'm kind of all over the place in this review. I was a little bit disappointed by the lack of Pennywise. He wasn't in this movie as much as I was hoping for. He was in a lot of the flashback sequences, and there's a lot of times where he's, kind of looking like a CGI monster or whatever. But him in, the flesh wasn't there all that much, which was a little bit disappointing because this is, the big finale. I would have expected Pennywise to kind of be there more. So there are a few things, like I said, I feel like this movie could have improved on, but overall, it worked very, very well. One final little negative I have to mention is that when it cuts back to the kids, they did have to use de-aging effects on some of them. I think some of the kids really didn't need it, like Beverly, for example, because she doesn't look that much older in real life, I don't think. But some of the kids, like Eddie, Richie, and especially Ben, you could definitely tell they were de-aged at times, especially with Ben. There was many moments where I thought his face was very, very odd-looking. It's really only in the group scenes, honestly. Like, when they're all on their own and we're kind of seeing their side stories, the CGI wasn't bad then. It was kind of just when they're on their own. I know it sounds like I have a lot of negatives. I just feel like I have to bring up the things I had problems with. But overall, everything else about the movie, like I said, I really liked. It was funny. There was decent suspense. Like I said, it was just a good movie overall. It worked in many ways. So I'm going to give It Chapter 2 a 9 out of 10. I could probably give it a little bit lower, like an 8.5 because of the negatives that I gave it. But really, for me, like I said, this just worked so well as a conclusion, and I thought it wrapped up everything perfectly. It was emotional. So that's why I'm going with a 9 rather than just an 8.5. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on It Chapter 2. Again, sorry this review was very messy. I haven't made a review in a while, and my mind's all over the place right now. So hopefully my next review will be better. That'll probably be Ad Astra. And then Joker's the next big one in less than a month. So can't wait to see those two movies, guys. I'll see you then. Yeah.